Before I share my PowerPoint presentation, I thought that I will take you through what we have been doing in the last five lectures. As we have seen in the first lecture, I talked about the stupas and how understanding the stupas is central to understanding the history of Buddhism, because the stupas were like the axis mundi of the Buddhist development throughout the world. And then in the second lecture, we try to understand the various symbols, both iconic and iconic symbols in Buddhism, starting with various representations of the Buddha, Vajrasana as a seat representing the Buddha, the headdress of the Buddha, and the symbol of wheel, and so many symbols we have seen in the second lecture. And in the third lecture, we have seen how the discovery of Ashoka was so crucial to unlock the history of not only Buddhism, but the history of India itself, because the Ashoka's name was as if forgotten for a longer period of time, and there was no memory of Ashoka except in the Brahmanical Puranas. And then in the fourth lecture, we saw the how the Buddhism spread through various mechanisms like trading and welfare and health systems and education and so on and so forth. So we saw different means by which the Buddhism spread throughout not only the Indian subcontinent, but throughout the world, the world as we have seen in the context of the spread of Buddhism then. And in the fifth lecture, we try to look at a very interesting sort of a dialectics between Buddhism and Brahmanism, the mortal combat between the Buddhism and Brahmanism in terms of the epigraphical records and in terms of the textual analysis and some of the archaeological findings like in Bodh Gaya and in Sanchi, which reflected the revolution and counter-revolution that has taken place in this country, and it's still going on. And today, I have actually not much to say because it's about the archaeological sites throughout the world, but the understanding of the archaeological sites in the different parts of the world is also very crucial to make sense of what has happened in Indian subcontinent and so on and so forth. So I thought that I will begin with offering a few words of introduction to what we have been doing in the last 5 weeks. And today, I'm going to begin my presentation. So let me share my screen. So is my screen visible?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just give me one moment.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is from the very famous site in the what is called the Diamond Triangle in Orissa, and this is from Ratnagiri, and I went there for before a few years, and this is the Buddha in the Ratnagiri site, which is a very interesting site as far as the medieval Buddhism is concerned, because as we are going to see in the presentation today, that how the Pala dynasty and the political period before that and its linkages, as we have seen in the previous lectures, with the different parts of the world has led to the spread of the not only the ideas but also the iconography. So this site, as I have been talking to you in Odisha, is they had a strong presence of what is called the Samantas or the feudals, and there is a mention of one tribal king whose name is Vajranag, who donated the well to this place, and his Kula is mentioned, and he belonged to Naga Kula, and we have seen that how the Vajrayana Buddhism, as we have seen, had this remarkable outreach among the tribals, and the iconography like of Samvara or Savvara or Chakra Savvara, they were very influenced by the tribal deities. So I just wanted to begin by connecting the today's presentation lecture with the previous one. So this is a very interesting quote by Maurice Halwatch, Collective memory, as we know, reconstructs an image of the record in each epoch with the predominant thoughts of the society. So whatever we hear in this last 5 lectures, it is not in our, many of the things are not included in our textbooks because the dominant, ideology of today is not favorable to the thoughts of the Buddha, and therefore, whatever the image is reconstructed of the past, it's in accordance with the predominant thought of the society, and collective remembrance has a double focus: a physical object, a material reality, and a statue, a monument, a place in space, and also a symbol or something of spiritual significance, something shared by the group that adheres to and is superimposed on this physical reality. So, that is about the collective memory, the social memory. And we know that the social memory in India is at this moment is dominated by certain groups, and which completely eclipse what can be called the very dominant strand of the thoughts forces that has gone on in this country. So let's begin with the Vajrayana Buddhism, because that's enable us to look at the various symbolism, various iconographies, various epigraphies that enable us to understand the development of the archaeological sites elsewhere, as we are going to see. So the textual development of mandala, is as in accordance with the polity of the time. As I said, that it was an hierarchical structure. Samanta feudalism. There were small samans all over the places, and the nature of the mandala represents a kind of social political interest and the realities of that time. And the central defining metaphor is a centralizing figure. So you see all the mandalas that we study, and we also saw that how the stupa can be seen as a mandala, as a physical mandala, and that's what was done in the history of Buddhism, transforming stupas into mandalas. So you see, this iconography helps us to feel the pulse of the history of of the history of the time. So here is a symbol of a king, Chakravarti Bodhisattva, who is shown with his right hand on his head, thinking about thinking sympathetically about the people. And then there is in his hand there is a rosary, how to bring the people out of the samsara, and all this different symbolism. So when we are looking at the Buddhist symbolism like mandala or any other deities, as a manifestation of shunyata, we have to bear in mind that they convey something semiotic sort of information to us. And this is at the time when Buddhism was aligning politically with the rulers of the time. So I just wanted to bring this few images from Bangladesh. And as we know today that there are many sites of Buddhist interest in Bangladesh. Like there was a Somapura Vihara. There was this very famous site of Mainamati in Bangladesh, which sort of brings a very close connection with what was happening in the Bengal and Odisha of the time. So I just wanted to bring in a few images to connect with what we have been talking so far. So this Parna Shabari is a very interesting image. She's trampling on the Brahminical deities, and we can see the 5 Dhanis Buddhas on the top, and she has this bow and arrow in her hand, representing a kind of the origin in the communities of the time. So you see, I just wanted to connect that, and this is a very interesting sort of a map of a journey of how the Buddhist world was connected. So, for example, if you look at this particular slide, you can begin to see that this map here shown in the market area is actually the period of the it coincides mostly with the territories ruled by Harsha and the Pala rulers, and it was like a center of the time. Even during the 7th and the 10th century, this was a very vibrant area for Buddhism. And you see the sites like Vikramshila, Nalanda, Kesaria, and we are going to reflect a bit on Kesaria, then Ratnagiri that I talked about, Udaygiri, and you can see here what is termed as the Indian Buddhist circle, had the very famous monks like Xuanzang, Yijing, Kumar Ghosha, Vajrabuddhi, Shubhakar Sinha, Amog Vajra, Huigo, Pradnya, Dharmapal, and Shivu. You see, these are all very important names in the history of Buddhism. And they contributed a lot, not only to the spread of the Buddhist ideas, but also to the spread of the Buddhist architectural plans, as we have seen in the previous lectures. And we can see here the Sri Vijayan Empire, which had connections with the Pala Empire, as we have seen in the past lectures. So you see, this kind of shows the interconnected world that the Buddhist plied as all over the places. Like there is a Chinese Buddhist circle. There are people who are connecting all these different points, geographical points, in terms of their travel. So you see, we have looked a little bit about the interest, the Tang dynasty Buddhism, and how it was supporting the Central Asian states, and how the fall of Buddhism, fall of Harsha, the death of Harsha, and the fall of Tang dynasty led to the weakening of the Central Asian Buddhist kingdoms, and that's paved the way for the Islamic invasion, as we have seen. But this particular sort of a map gives us an idea as to how the Buddhist world was connected, like India, China, and Indonesia. They were all connected together seamlessly, as we can say. This is a more sort of the paths which were traveled by the Buddhist monks and the traders and other people. You see, this is the Indian esoteric Buddhist circle, and there are the mention of many people here. But you can see from this graph that there is a mention of Ellora, which was a sort of a very famous esoteric center where the mandalas were carved in the stones. And there is Kaneri, very famous esoteric center of the time, Sopara, and we have seen that Konkan was a very strong center of the esoteric Buddhism. But these are the names of the few monks who have traveled from different parts of the globe, with sometimes for the studies, sometimes for teaching, and sometimes just to build the diplomatic relationships between the various states of the time. So you see here Abhaygiri in Sri Lanka, and it can come as a surprise that Sri Lanka was a very strong center in the 8th and 9th century of esoteric Buddhism, and the great monks like Nagabuddhi and Vajrabodhi, they have all gone to Abhaygiri Vihar, and the recent excavation have brought a very interesting connection between all these places as to how vibrant they were. So you see, this is a very interesting esoteric circle, with a dominant sort of ground in the Orissa and Bihar, and the part of Konkan, and even Srikakulam, the Srishail Parvat at one point of time was a very strong center of esoteric Buddhism. And there are myths and stories like Shankara came and destroyed everything, but we have to take those myths with a pinch of salt. And you see, this gives us an idea as to how the Buddhist world was not static or disconnected in the different groups. The people were interacting, the ideas were flowing, the texts were moving from one place to another. So this map gives us an idea of the dynamic Buddhist world of the time. So this is very interesting. The research done by Swati Chemburkar and Andrea Ackery. This is a very interesting thing. In the previous lecture, I talked about the various structures created by the Pala rulers and different monastics, the different university structures that they created, the different Mahaviharas that they created. And on the right hand top, there is an aerial view of the Kesariya Stupa. And adjacent to that, there is an aerial view, a reconstruction of what is called the Stupa in Borobudur. And we have seen that the Pala rulers had a contact or connection with the Shailendra Empire. And you see, why this is very interesting, because this Kesariya Stupa that even we can visit today, it's a very important stupa in the Buddhist history. Ashoka built a stupa, a massive stupa, and then it, according to the historian, even Harsha made it a point to reconstruct the stupa, and then it was the turn of the Pala rulers who added more, features to the already existing stoop. You see, the stoop becomes a kind of a center line to understand the history of Buddhism, and you see from this Kesariya stoop resembles the stupa in Borobudur, and it is said that they are homologous, as if the stupa in Borobudur was constructed in the line of 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 the stupa in Kesariya. And there was also Abhaygiri monastery in the Java and Sumatra. The Sri Lanka had a strong esoteric centers, as we have seen. So you see, I just wanted to bring in some of the striking familiarities which were researched by Swati and Akri. The similarity of, so this homology between the different stupas, even the arrangements of the Buddha images, shows that there is a remarkable sort of the exchange that was not just taking place in terms of what is called the ideas, but also the iconography, the familiarity with the symbols, with their asset aesthetic importance. So we can see, we can witness this very clearly if we just look at that. So you see, I just wanted to talk about Abhaygiri a bit, because it was a very strong center of Vajrayana. It comes as a shock to many people that at some point of time Sri Lanka was like a hotbed of the Vajrayana or esoteric Buddhism, and this inscription, Vajradhatu Mandala, it's a mandala that has been talked very early on. They say that it originated in the 6th century, and this was found in Abhaygiri. And there is a small depiction of a Vajradhatu Mahamandala, and this mandala traveled all the way from Ratnagiri, we don't know, via Sri Lanka to Java, Sumatra, and all the way up to Japan. All the way up to Japan. The esoteric Buddhism in Japan predates the Buddhism in Tibet. And you see this through this epigraphical archaeological findings, we can begin to see how different sites have come into shape. So Abhaygiri and its images, now we know for sure that how the Sri Lanka was at certain point of time, and hotbed of Vajrayana esoteric Buddhism. There was also the Mahavihar tradition in Sri Lanka, which was dominantly a Theravada tradition, and there was often an intellectual conflict between the two Mahavihars. And in the history, then a king, I think Parakram Bahu II, who came to the power, and he supported the Mahavihara movement, and the what is called the Jetavana movement or Abhaygiri movement was stopped. According to some scholars, these all important sites which are called the Pabbata Viharas, the Viharas on the top of the hills, were the strong centers of the esoteric Buddhism. So another interesting site that has been hiding in Sri Lanka is this Rajagala. And during the civil war in Sri Lanka, this site was occupied by LTT, and the one of the things that LTT did not did not disturb the site. So after the civil war, when the archaeologists again entered into the area, they could find this very magnificent site in Sri Lanka and in Ampara district. And what is the specialty of this the site is this, that it said that the stupa of Mahendra was built here. So there is apparently an inscription here which says that the stupa of Mahendra existed here at some point of time. So I just wanted to bring in the diversity of the archaeological sites, even in a country like Sri Lanka, which is today predominantly a Theravada country. You can see all these varieties of the archaeological sites in a country where there is a living Buddhism connected with the Indian subcontinent, as it were. Gandhara, of course, is a very important site, and it is one of the sites which where ongoing excavation is going on with an international team of the archaeologists. I think that I'm going to put a little emphasis on the manuscripts which were found in Gandhara, which has become a sort of, they are the first sort of the sources from the antiquity that have survived to our present time, giving us a window into the history of Buddhism, the textual history of the Buddhism. They are written in of course, written in Gandhari Prakrit. and the script is Kharosthi, and very few people are there in the world who can read it. And but it offers a window into the early Buddhist texts, because some of them predates the before Christ, and the second century, third century AD, and they are very important. And some of the scholars who have looked into that, they have found a very interesting connection between the agamas and the Pali Nikayas. There is not a major difference between the two traditions. When it began. So there are many images where very very famous. You can certainly find good videos which talks about the archaeological findings in Gandhara. I just wanted to bring some of the points here. So you see the Gandharan manuscripts. It shows the unity of Buddhism. The oldest surviving Buddhist manuscripts, remarkable similarities between the Agamas and Nikayas, and thriving intellectual culture. That is the place where the Hellenic culture, civilization came in contact with the Mauryan Empire, leading to, and later on the Kushana Empire, leading to the development of the beautiful art that has no parallel in the history of the world. So you see, this Gandharan region is a very important sort of a site to study the history of Buddhism. So this is the location of Gandhara. This is one of the very famous image of the Buddha, the fasting Buddha. And you see this area, very important area, very close to the Silk Route. The today's Peshawar was one of the very important towns at the time, and even today in the city of Peshawar, we can find a lot of Buddhist remains. And you see, there was of course Takshila University, and there was Shahabaj Gadi, where the Ashokan inscription was found, and it is a very interesting place. All the gateway to the west, as we can say. So these are some of the images from the Gandhara. Many beautiful images. Bamiyan is a very important site, in Afghanistan, and as you can see that it was something which was on the Silk Route, a very major center of the trade, and you can see from these photographs that there was not just the Buddha. There were a lot of caves that were inhabited by the monks. And the Gandhara was the Bamiyan was a very important center for learning, as it has been brought out by the travelogues of Xuanzang, that it was a very flourishing center of the Buddhist learning. The bottommost photographs, the small holes are the cave dwellings of the monks, and you can see all over the mountains, there was a thriving population of the Buddhist people around there. So I just wanted to bring in Bamiyan to show you the Buddhist sites out of India, because this is about the Buddhist sites out of India. These are some of the sketches that have been drawn by the Japanese group about this. We talk about the big Buddhas, but there is also a third Buddha which was very big, a Buddha Kolosi, and there are many structures like that around Bamiyan. So one of the sites that had acquired a great interest among the scholars is this site of Danhuang. And there are two clusters of cave, Danhuang and Mogao. There are hundreds of caves in this region, and the site was deserted for a long time. It was in the middle of the desert, and so many things have been found there when the site was discovered. One of them was a treasure trove of about 10,000 Buddhist manuals, and they are from all different languages. Like you find a text in Tibetan, in what is called Chinese, classical Chinese. You see a text from Prakrit, Sanskrit, and you name it. And the degree of the range of the text found there, manuscripts found there, it's so varying that it shows that it was a very thriving sort of the center of the international learning, and it itself, this finding itself shows a kind of a Buddhist cosmopolitanism that existed there in Danhong. And I reckon that such was the case with Ajanta, where the people were traveling for all over the places, and so on and so forth. So the site of Danhong is very important, and even it is said that if people try to engage with the Danhong manuscripts, it will take more years, more and more years to completely get into grips of the Danhong findings. So this is the place of Danhong. It was on the Silk Route, and Danhong and Mogao, they are very close sort of clusters. And in the last lecture, we have seen that how they were linked with Indian subcontinent through the Silk Route. So Danhong is a very interesting site, and I just brought in some of the photographs here. The topmost is the Mahaparinirvan Buddha, which we can see even in Ajanta, and this is how the Danhong was situated geographically. So these are some of the images of Danhong, and it's located in desert, and you can appreciate how the whole the plan. And so this is the Danhong today. This was when it was found, and these are various images from Danhong. I put this Buddha, the 10,000 Buddhas here, because the theme gets reflected, reconstructed in Ajanta and in several other places. So, and these are the meditating monks, as you can see from the bottom slide, which is found in many paintings, many manuscripts, and many important sculptures that are still there in Danhong. So I wanted to also bring to your notice this very important site, and the beauty of this Tangut Empire, which was like a switchboard of different Buddhist schools at the time. And the name of the places was Karakoto. It was in the Gobi Desert, completely deserted and forgotten. And this Tangut Empire was a very interesting empire. They adopted the Chinese characters, but used it, give them a different meanings. They had developed a writing system based on the Chinese characters, and at the same time they had this many what is called the manuscripts, which are extant today. This monk here, we don't know his name, but this is, you can see this is very old painting of a monk found in Karakoto. There was one stupa which was hollow, and all the findings were kept there before the site was deserted, because there was no water in that area. So you see, this monk, according to the scholar, says that he represents the Tibetan Buddhist, and Tangut Empire was a very strong hold of the Tibetan empire, as we are going to look into the strategic position of the Karakoto. And the Karakoto is called the Black Town, or the Death Town, because it was such a inhospitable site that people had to desert it. And it has an interesting history of discovery by a Russian man, Kozulov. But now people came to know that he had taken the undue credit, which was not due to it. There was another person who discovered it. You can see all these beautiful documentaries which are there, available on the YouTube. But I just wanted to bring this site to your notice, Karakoto, which is called the Lost Buddhist Empire. And you can see this is the site when it was found. All the stupas that you see, this is the big stupa in the middle, where all the manuscripts and the paintings and all were placed. So recently, Zhao Ma did an interesting PhD thesis from Harvard University just in 2023, where they have brought a very interesting connection. And these three maps, I find them very interesting connection. So you see, let's look at the map first. The first map, the Indo-Chinese Buddhist complex in the beginning of the 7th century. So this is how, as we have seen, that the vibrant world of the Buddhist spread. And you can see Nalanda or Magadha is very important part of it. Takshila all the way to Khotan, Danhong, and the major part of the China. And that was what the Buddhist complex. And in the second map, you can see that that was the Sino-Tibetan Buddhist complex, when this axis, as shown in the first map, had been disrupted. And this author, this scholar, researcher, Ma, has mapped these two maps together, and where they overlap is a Tangut state. So you can see the Tangut state in green in the third sort of in the third map, showing as if how the small state, the lost empire of Tangut, was evolved in this dynamical change that were taking place in the different parts of the Buddhist world. That was a time, 12th century. Uh, we can see that that was the end of the political support to Buddhism. The Pala dynasty was gone. There were small samantas. They couldn't sustain for a long time. The Indian support, the Indian axis was gone. The Central Asian axis was gone, and this China had become a little bit of anti-Buddhist during that time. So see, this is all the dynamic events that are taking place there. And the Tangut state at that time was sort of holding the I would say the flag, bearing the flag, holding the flag of Buddhism at that time. And it's very interesting study that Zhao Yangma had done in the recent times, just recently this year. So these are some of the very interesting thankas which were found in Karakoto, the Black Town. You see, this is a very interesting figure here, and the stupa imagery and all these various deities. And this Buddha with two head is also found in Danhong and also Karakoto. The story behind this is that there was a man who went to the artist, and he wanted to have the image of the Buddha, and the artist said that he has only enough resources to do one Buddha, and the second man who also wanted to have a Buddha image was disappointed. But when the Buddha was sculpted, it splits into two heads. So that's the story behind this Buddha heads. A mythical story, but very interesting story. So these are some of the manuscripts which were found in Karakoto. The stupa had the scriptures in it, and this is the Bhaisajya Guru. So I just wanted to bring in some of the interesting findings at Karakoto. Now, this is something which has been talked about, Buddhism in Persia, and very interesting for understanding the contact between the West and India itself. Why is that? Because the Buddhism reached Bach, which is a very famous place in the medieval period, which had this very strong center of Buddhism called the Navavihar, and till recent time it was considered to be a Zoroastrian site, but now it has been proved that the Navavihar means Navavihar, and they were the very strong centers of the Buddhist learning. They said that they had an entire sort of a region dominated by the Buddhist priest who was known as Barakid, and Barakid is the derives its origin from Pramukh in Sanskrit, head or Pramukh, and they were very dominant. They went on to become a very important part of the Asadi's empire, rising up to the level of even the Vajirs and the ministers, and they were Buddhist, and later on they converted to Islam, but they had left a profound impact on the Islamic learning, particularly the system of madrasas, and as we have seen the system of what is called the recursive method of argument, which were taught in the Buddhist Vihar. So there are some books available now showing how the Muslims learned these two ways to the system of education of the viharas and methods to explore the truth, to argue back and forth. So just let me read it through. Buddhism reached Bach at the time of Ashoka. According to some legendary stories, that Tapussa Ballika were from Bach, the first two people who were converted from the first two tradesmen who came in contact with the Buddha, Tapussa Ballika. Some people claim that they were the Burmese, and Buddha gave them the hair, and on the hair this Shwedagon pagoda is built. But there is another version of that which says that the Tapussa Ballika were from the Bach. And in the history, the parts of Bach belong to Kushanas, And now the scholars are saying particularly the anthropological studies done by one famous person, Mustafa Waziri, who has not done the archaeological sort of exploration, but he has done the anthropological approach, and he has found a lot of Buddhist element, in the Persian culture. So I'm just going to go through it very quickly. So the Buddhist Jatakas were translated in Arabic, and Vilawar Buddha's a very famous story of Buddha's, Bodhisattva has been a very part and parcel of the storytelling there. And one of the very interesting facts which he brings out is the worship of what is called the Kadam Gaha, holy footprints. And they are documented in Iran in about 300 places. So we have seen that how the Buddha Pada were sort of representative of the Buddha. And he also found some cave complexes in the line of Buddhist caves all over. And of course, there is this very strong evidence of the Buddhist Burma-Kid families. So according to Baruni, in former times, Khurasan, Persis, Iraq, Mosul, the country up to the frontier of Syria was Buddhistic. But the Zarathustra went forth from Azerbaijan and preached Magism in Bach. In consequence, the Buddhists were banished from those countries and had to immigrate to the countries east of Bach. So that's what Biruni has to say about this thing. But Nava Bahars or the new Vihars were found all over the places. About hundreds of places are identified with the root Vihar or Bahar in Iran today. So this is the book that I was talking about. So this is the last slide that I'm of the day today, and this will bring us to a very recent finding of the Buddha image in a Roman temple in 200 AD in a place called Bernice. And it's a very recent finding, and people are talking about this finding, that how the Buddhism has gone to the Roman world. And we can see that there is this to and fro interaction. The ships were plying from the docks of Bombay all the way to the Roman Empire. And we have seen in the previous lectures as to how the political happenings at different places affected the trade and commerce, and affected the spread of Buddhism. So I just wanted to give this last sort of a slide to you to think about this period of Buddhism. Even today, there are a lot of things to be discovered. I didn't talk about Bagan, which is a very interesting place itself in Burma. Some of you might have gone to Ayutthaya in Thailand, and it's also another interesting place. Champa in Vietnam, showing the dynamism between Buddhism and Shaivism. And there are these places which are which needs to be studied. And even today we are exhuming so many things which throws new light on it. So what I would do, I will stop here for today. But before I stop, I thought that to summarize the 6 talks or lectures that we have been conducting for last several weeks now, I wanted to just bring to you some of the areas of the research and points that needs to be taken up. Many of you are scholars and young budding scholars. So I thought, so I will just spare a few minutes to talk about this, new frontiers of research. So one of them is, of course, understanding the archaeological timeline, because the timeline is fudged, as we have seen in the chronology of the Brahminical text that we have seen. How now the rewriting of the chronologies. Most of the Brahminical texts were written after the Buddha, and we have seen now there are categorically established, at least some firm timelines to understand when different thoughts arrived in the scene. And but in the context of the research, we can look at the archaeological timelines, a chronology as to what had happened in the archaeological time. In terms of wherever you find the Buddhist sites in India, you find pre-Buddhist existence there. Like you find evidences of the Iron Age, Bronze Age, and so on and so forth. So the question before us is to find out what is the pre-Buddhist status of those sites. So most of the major sites that you study, you can find out the pre-Buddhist material objects there, and we have to make sense of it as to how Buddhism spread. It's very important to understand the chronology of the events or the sites. So and the second thing is very interesting here, because I told you that there are, like, for example, in the state of Andhra, there are more than 140 documented Buddhist sites, but we hardly have mapped them. In Maharashtra, there are hundreds of Buddhist sites. We hardly have mapped them. There is no data which will show, the extent of the Buddhist sites, which are there even today. So I think the second interesting area is to really map out the Buddhist sites throughout India, Indian subcontinent even, and to understand the sacred geography of Buddhism, because in the myths, a lot of things are there, like in the Puranic myths of Gayasur, as we were talking about, and the Vishnu kept the foot on Gaya, and he kept a lotus on Puri, and he kept his gada on the chest of the Gayasur, which is Jajpur, which was a very important place of the Buddhism, as I have shown you the inscriptional evidences of those things. So in order to make sense of these myths and all, we have to, grasp and understand the sacred geography of Buddhism itself. The fourth area that's very interesting for the further research is to understand the intellectual history, because when we talk about the Buddhist and Brahminical philosophical debates and dialogues, we get interesting points. Like it is said that the Bhavya or Bhava Vivek was the first person to talk about, Vedanta. He said, people say that he coined the word Vedanta. He's a Buddhist philosopher before Shankara. And, there are a lot of interesting debates. And when the Buddhism disappeared in the institutional form in India, the whole philosophical growth stunted in India. And we have to see, why was that? What happened to the intellectual landscape? The history of ideas like karma and rebirth. Where do they come from? Varna. Ashoka never mentions about karma, rebirth, varna. What happened? When do they come? When did the words start coming? What about the dharma? You see, so we have to, understand the intellectual history, plot the chronologies of both the Brahminical and the Buddhist systems of thought. And you see, in the Brahminical systems, there are philosophers from the same system accusing each other of borrowing from the Buddhist philosophers, calling each other pseudo-Buddhists. You see, so it's all area, needs to be uncovered. So I think that's a very important sort of a thing that we need to do. Another thing is we have to do the semiotic analysis of the myths, of the symbols of even the various systems of thoughts existed in time. We have to hunt for the reason for the downfall of Buddhism, because it was shrouded in mystery, but now some light is becoming clear. Like we have our friend here today, Peter Friedlander, joining us from Australia. He is somebody who has brought a very important connection between the Buddhist philosophical thoughts and Saint Kabir, and we can see this whole range of the Buddhist terms spreading all over in the medieval intellectual landscape. Then we have to also study what happened to the Buddhist Sangha. What were the different developments that took place in the ideal of a Buddhist, for example. So now we know for sure that there were the strong lay persons who were called the Gomins, who were very learned people, but chose to stay at a place at their home. And then there were green bodhisattvas, as we have seen, the people who lived in the homes and practiced the Buddhism in a very serious way. And there were different categories of monks in the monasteries who looked after the logistics and money and all other things. So you see, we have to understand the history of the Sangha. And the last and the important point is, most of the material that we have studied has come from the political patronage and the material evidences that came into being because of the political patronage. We hardly know what is the popular form of Buddhism, how it took place in the societies, how it took place in the communities. what was the Buddhism of the people. And I think that's a very important point, that we need to really understand how people practice Buddhism in their day-to-day life, in their family context, in their social context. And I think these are some of the very interesting ideas that I thought that I should unwrap here, so that some of you might get an interesting sort of perspective as to how we can go ahead. So I will stop here. I would like to, before I open up the forum for another question and answer, I would just formally thank all the organizers. Bodhi sir has asked me to talk about these 6 important topics, and I was very happy to do that. And all of you who have been patient enough to participate in the last 6 lectures, thank you all. And also Dinesh for hosting it every Sunday at 6.